Well, Razorback fans, we're just 9 days away from Razorback Football. A lot of transfers on this team that's going to make a difference, but do they necessarily have to be for some big program? Well, let's talk about it on today's Locked On Razorbacks podcast.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into Locked On Razorbacks podcast. I am your host, John Nabors. I am also the host of Inside Arkansas Live, which you can catch every weekday at noon on Inside Arkansas and InsideArkansas.com. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Hope everybody's having a wonderful Tuesday. Again, 9 days away from Razorback football, which, of course, we'll talk about, just as we always have. And, you know, it's kind of slowing down now. Practices are closed, and we get a chance to hear from some players. Yesterday, had a chance to hear from a player that actually is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this particular podcast, or at least start off with this topic. Because, listen, transfers have been a part of college sports, not just football, basketball, baseball, all of that, really over the past 3 years. And everyone says how different it is. Everyone says how much it's changed, and it has. There's no doubt. But to me, the transfer portal has just basically become a bigger version of going the JUCO route, which unfortunately used to be a very big deal that would help out a lot of teams, but nowadays it's kind of a second nature thing. And also players that would be able to sit out a year, a graduate transfer. You know, it was just amazing how much more difficult it used to be. But think about some of the transfers that Arkansas was able to get, not only over the past few years, but even going back to before the transfer portal even existed. You have some really good players. In fact, you know, you had some guys like that stand out to me, a guy like an Anthony Leon or Riddell Krim during the Bobby Petrino years. Jericho Nelson, I believe, was also a player that was a transfer. I could be wrong about that now that I just think about it. But just during the Petrino era, though, there were some pretty key pieces there. And, you know, here and there, you'd get players like that, and sometimes they hit, sometimes they wouldn't. But it was a very easy way to get some depth and an easy way to get some guys of experience. But do you remember any time that whenever you got that player from a big school and you just had to wait a year, that you had to sit out and you had to wait a year, and you're like, okay, this guy could be the future. This guy could be the next big thing. Just got to wait a year because, I mean, look what school you went to. One of the greatest examples of that I always think about is Ricky Town. Now, for those of you who don't remember Ricky Town, look it up. But those of you who do, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Ricky Town was a 4-star, borderline 5-star quarterback coming out of high school. He originally was at USC and wasn't working out for him, and he transferred to Arkansas in the spring. And I remember that was during the time when Arkansas had, I think it was after Brandon Allen, but like Austin Allen was there. And then you had Rafe Peavy, you had Ty Story, you had Cole Kelly. Like Bielema had this thing where he signed a high school quarterback each and every year, and none of them really ever transferred until about 2 or 3 years in. So Ricky Towns coming in, I was like, oh, geez, okay, well, this guy went to USC, big-time school, big-time player coming out of high school. He could be the future of Arkansas. Folks, I don't even know if I remember watching practices, and he was literally running scout team. He wasn't even on the third string. He's running scout team, and that was after a year he had been there. And I'm not trying to pick on him. I'm just bringing up an example that there are guys that came from big schools, quote unquote, that got you really excited and thought they'd be the next coming, and they just never panned out. And that's in all sports, not just college football. But when you think about guys from small schools, they're probably not going to excite you as much, right? I mean, I know whenever John Ridgeway came from that small school in Illinois. Places were getting after him or whatever. But I remember not being that excited about him. It was like, okay, great. A kid from Illinois, some small school in Illinois. What was that supposed to do? Great. Well, then you saw him play. And thank goodness for him, because that was during the year where Arkansas has such a poor defensive line. And they were having to run the 3-4 or 3-3-5. And I remember that's not what Barry Odom wanted to do, and that's not what anybody wanted to do, but they just didn't have the defensive lineman. And if they didn't have a guy like John Ridgway, their D-line may have been even worse. And it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great, but it was because of John Ridgway. He came from a small school. And Anton Junkaj is kind of the example that I'm bringing up here because he came from Albany. And he was a highly regarded player. He rated out really well from Pro Football Focus. He had a few other offers to other places too. They decided to come to Arkansas. Now, when I heard about Anton Junkaj, I was like, that's a cool name. And even though I didn't know how to pronounce it, I had to learn how to do it. But it was a cool name. And I don't really know what to expect of him. Because it didn't give me the feelings like Drew Sanders did or Jaden Hazelwood did or any of those players. Because they came from big schools. But here's the thing, is like Jaden Hazelwood was fine, but does anybody just remember anything about Jaden Hazelwood? It was like, oh, it stood out and that really showcased his 5-star ability. I mean, he had a few plays here and there. Drew Sanders, I think, lived up to that expectation. No, there were some others too. But the point is that just because a transfer does not come from a big school does not mean that he can't contribute. Look at the NFL. This is one of my favorite things ever, is you look at the stats and you look at the numbers and all this stuff. If you ever watch an NFL game and you see the starting lineups that they come up with, and a lot of cases, the players will mention the schools that they're from. Sometimes they'll do college. Most of the time they'll do the college. But sometimes they'll do their high school or, maybe make a joke or whatever. But when you hear that, listen to the amount of Power 5 schools and listen to the amount of non-Power 5 schools or D2 schools. It's pretty incredible to see and to hear how many of those guys come from, quote, small schools. And it just makes you crazy because you're like, wow, okay. All these players that have all these scholarship offers coming out of high school that go to all these big schools, how do people like these players bust through? How do they find a way to navigate through the NFL or navigate through their college ranks and then get into the NFL and get a job when there's these other players that were at these big-time schools, that started at these big-time schools, that were really great college football players at these big-time schools, but they just don't pan out. How does that make sense? How does that work? Well, something you got to remember, folks, is that in college football, or we'll just make it in very general, in all sports, people hit their athletic stride at different times. I mean, there's so many examples of players that peaked in college. And that's not an insult towards them. It's just that was the highest level that they could grow into. And they may have been great in college, but it just didn't work out for them in the NFL because it's a different game. It's a different thing. But there are some players that may have been fine college players, decent college players. And then when they get to the NFL, they take over and they become these legendary, iconic, incredible quarterbacks. And I'm using quarterbacks as I should as an example, but there's a lot of other players like that too. But if you want to use the quarterback realm of it, I mean, listen, Patrick Mahomes was a really good quarterback coming out of college, but I don't think anybody anticipated him doing what he's doing now. Tom Brady is the ultimate example of it. Aaron Rodgers, I know he's still a first-round pick, but he's a late first-round pick, and a lot of people slept on him. He went to Cal. And no, he's a phenomenal quarterback. So, Lamar Jackson went to Louisville, and he was a Heisman Trophy winner. He's more of the exception to the rule, to somebody who's great in college and also translate to the NFL. But my point is that you just never know when these players are going to hit their stride. And for guys like an Anton Junkaj or somebody like any of the players that, of course, his name just escaped me. Goodness. I'm going to have to think about it now. Wow, that's okay. I just lost it, so apologies about that. But either way, these players that come from these smaller schools that transfer in, don't look at the schools they came from, okay? Don't look at the star rating that they had coming out of high school and be like, well, this guy sucks. Why would you want him? He doesn't know what it's like playing in the SEC. Why would anybody want to get this player on there? How's he going to help us? Well, give it time. Let's see how it pans out. Because who knows? Some of these transfers that Arkansas had this year, which, I don't think it really moved the needle for a lot of people, but they could become some incredible players, some really helpful players. And you guys know, I talked about it yesterday, how big I am on Taylon Green. Taylon Green played at Boise State last year and didn't have great numbers. So why is anyone excited about him? Well, sometimes it's about the fit. Sometimes it's about when you're hitting your stride as an athlete. And sometimes it's just about finding the right situation. So, transfer portal, they doesn't know nothing about prestige. Doesn't care what school you've come from and what school you're going into. What matters is just about you making that right decision to go to that said school, how you can help out, and how the coaches develop you and putting you in a position to be successful. I'm excited about some of these transfers. The more I've read about them, the more I've thought about them, the more I've kind of, learned a few things about like their backgrounds and everything. They have potential. I'm not going to put any expectations on it, but they have some real potential, that's for sure. Well, we're going to talk about something from a little basketball football element here in just a second, so stay with us here on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. All right, folks, here on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast, it's been a while, but we got to tell you about Ibotta. Sandals, sunscreen, snacks for the kids. What do all these things have in common? Well, you're probably buying a ton of them again this summer. But don't stress about the cost, all right? Use Ibotta and get cash back for all of your purchases when you stock up on all the summer essentials, especially with all the stuff that's going back to school. It's still hot out there. It still feels like it's summertime. But Ibotta, you got to check it out. It's a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you go out and shop. Earn on hundreds of items, from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys, so you can make sure that you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user earns about $256 a year. Think about that, $256. I think we could all use that type of money. That could cover the cost of the entire shopping trip, that flight you've been eyeing, or a fancy dinner that you've been craving. It's time that you joined over 50 million users who use Ibotta to earn cash back every time that they shop. And right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners, just for trying Ibotta, $5. $5 just for trying it, using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app and start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege. All right, moving on into the next segment of the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. Folks, I love cross promotions. And anytime that you have, with the Razorbacks in particular, in this case, you got coaches hanging out, you got the camps going on, like all of this stuff. It's always fun to kind of see some of the coaches get together or at least make appearances other places. And that's exactly what happened yesterday at Razorback Football practice. Media couldn't go, but one person that did was John Calipari. They posted a picture of him, and this dude's just over here with a football, tossing it around, wearing sunglasses, sitting there standing on the practice field, having a good old time. And it's pretty awesome to see him feeling that excited about everything and just being that casual. I'd like to think, I don't know this for a fact, and it's probably not true, but I'm just going to go ahead and assume that it is true. I would love if it was the fact that he didn't tell anybody he was going to go to the practice. He didn't let anyone know. He was just more of like walking down right there next to the practice fields and saw the gate a little bit open. He's like, hey, I'm going to come hang out and see what's going on. It's probably not what happened, but still, I think it'd be really cool. But he's just got an element, man. He's just got an aura to him. And seeing him out there just hanging out, it got everybody so excited, and everybody's just talking about him and all of that. And even on top of that, too, and this was something we talked about on Inside Arkansas Live yesterday, there's a great article that was put out by CBS Sports and talking about John Calipari and a lot of the other coaches that were hired here in college basketball, some of the major college basketball coaching hires. And people were hearing from anonymous coaches on some of their thoughts. And the voting, of course, was John Calipari being the guy. Like, they're just like, he was the best hire made of any program here this offseason. So that was the coaches that voted on that and talked to him about it. So no surprise there. But one of the things there, I guess there was like 4 comments that were made in the article. And one of them was just very simple of why they voted for him to be the biggest and best hire is because he's a Hall of Fame coach, period. Simple enough. But there was also another anonymous coach that went into a little bit more detail about Cal and said that he stayed at Kentucky too long. He stayed there too long, and he knows it. And by him going to Arkansas, it has, and he's talking about him knowing Cal personally, it has completely lifted a weight off of his shoulders where he's happy again. He's energized again. He can't wait to get started. He feels like he's a young guy once again and a young coach that's got a lot of energy, and he's got a huge support system at Arkansas, and he's got the fans that love it. I mean, they sold out season tickets. So, no surprise there. But they love him. They love just what he's doing and what he's building. And he feels like the pressure isn't there like it was at Kentucky. Now, here's the thing. People will immediately hear that, all you Big Blue Nation people out there, and be like, yeah, of course, because we expect to win championships at Kentucky. That's what we expect to do. And if you're, in Arkansas, they don't expect to win championships. I don't think that's what they're saying. I think what they're saying is that, like Nolan Richardson always talked about, when you create a monster, you got to feed it. And if you can't feed it, it's going to eat you. And at Kentucky with Cal, that's what happened. Because think about it. At a lot of other schools, the last 3 years, for instance, for Kentucky, they've won one NCAA tournament game, right? Right. At a lot of schools, you know who would take that, especially when it came to a regular season, as successful as they were, even though they only won one NCAA tournament game, there's a lot of places that can't even get to the tournament consistently enough that would have loved that. Well, that's not good enough at Kentucky. And you Kentucky fans can say whatever you want. You can say it's about our history and tradition, but what it's really about is what Cal proved to you that he could accomplish. And when he proved that he could win a national championship, he proved he could go to these Final Fours, that became the expectation. It's not wrong. It's not a bad thing. It's just the facts. And so at some point in time, you just get to the point where it just seems so routine. The luster and the aura is worn off. You just don't feel like the connection's there anymore. You don't have the energy anymore. And even though you felt like you were having some good seasons, you got to win in the tournament. And they wanted you gone. They wanted you gone immediately. They didn't care. And going to Arkansas, if the next 3 years of John Calipari, especially knowing the talent he's going to have, if they only win one NCAA tournament game, Kentucky fans, really think about this. Do you think that Razorback fans are just going to be like, oh, well, gee, at least we had fun? No. They're going to be pissed off too. They're going to be demanding more. So it has nothing to do with that. What it has to do with is situations that Cal finds himself in at Arkansas with the support system that he's in, and also feeling that there's more to it that's there. Feeling just in a different situation. We all want to be in a different situation at times. Sometimes you just need that energy boost. Sometimes, even though we may be doing great at our jobs and something like, we may go over here back, well, there's this job over here, may pay me the same amount of money, but man, I'm going to be so much happier over there. Boom. There you go. That's what happens. So it's just funny to see how all the, like, just Cal being involved with the other programs and being seen and being that guy. I know football season's here and I'm excited for that, but man, Cal's the dude. Cal is that dude. He's that man. And when basketball season really gets going up, it's going to be even more fun. That's for sure. We'll talk about being 9 days away from Razorback football here in just a second, so stay with us on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. All right, folks, you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Well, we have something a little differently for you. Now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's number one sportsbook. Remember, FanDuel.com/lockedon. All right, so final segment here on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. So this is 9 days away. We're single digits. How cool is that? Single digits. And we'll have a chance to hear from Bobby Petrino tonight in a press conference. So we're really looking forward to that. So we should have some juicy stuff to talk about tomorrow. But this one, I don't even know why I'm bringing it up. There's certain numbers, there's certain things that you will just associate with Razorback players or whatever. 77 is always going to be Brandon Burlsworth. You know what I'm saying? Like, it always will be. Number 5, we'll talk about here in, 4 days. We all know. And it's the same thing with number 9. Now, Luke Hasz is number 9 right now for Arkansas. Great tight end. Luke Hasz could go up and become a Mackey Award winner, maybe back-to-back Mackey Award winners, maybe be a top NFL draft pick, maybe something like that. Be one of the best and most remembered tight ends in Razorback football history. But even if that happens, That's not going to be the number 9 that I know. That's not going to be my number 9. My number 9, just like your number 9, is Matt Jones. MJ, kids these days. I was talking to some of my interns a few weeks ago. And sometimes it kind of has to hit me a little bit. One, how I'm getting older, but also two, that there are people today, there are Razorback fans today that may not fully know and fully understand like certain players. And I was bringing up Matt Jones to one of them, and they were just like, oh yeah, I think the person I was talking to, they were born in 2005. And that was Matt Jones's last year at Arkansas. Or no, that wasn't even his last year. He was gone after that. So yeah, even worse. So I was talking to him about Matt Jones. I was like, just stopped. I was like, do you even remember Matt Jones? Like, I wasn't born yet. And man, that hit me. That hit me hard. Like, golly. But I just was floored by it. But either way, what I did though is I'm like, hey, just do me the solid. Just watch these highlights. Because they knew of him, but they didn't really know. I was like, just watch some of these highlights. And I showed them some of the highlights of Matt Jones. Shout out to War Machine. And they were almost like blown away. By like, whoa, this guy outran people. He was huge, but he was so fast. And I show him the games, and I tell him all these little numbers and stats. I'm like, hey, you guys know that Matt Jones literally was the quarterback in a 7 overtime, 6 overtime, and a 7 overtime game in 3 straight years. And we're talking about the old-fashioned overtime rules, not this new crap that they've done. You understand that he literally did not play wide receiver one bit. Well, I guess a few plays here and there, but one bit in college. And he goes to the NFL Combine, and he's shifting over to wide receiver, and he runs a 4.37 and has a 40-inch vertical leap. And he is such a freak athlete that he gets drafted in the first round. Like, played quarterback for 4 years in college. 4 years. Makes the switch to wide receiver and gets drafted in the first round. I know that there's instances where that's happened, but he was the dude. He was my childhood hero. I mean, for real. And so anytime I hear about 9, I just think of Matt Jones. Matt Jones days away from Razorback football. Single digits. Imagine if Matt Jones played in today's day and age. Just how incredible he would be. He'd win a Heisman. And so for any of you watching or any of you listening, if you don't know who Matt Jones is, if you haven't paid attention to who Matt Jones is, if you don't remember who Matt Jones is, go and watch those highlights. Really gives you a lot of nostalgia for one, but also a lot of fun times and fun memories in Razorback football. Dude was awesome. But appreciate all of you listening in and watching in to the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or on Google Play. You can also get after me on Twitter at John Nabors Show for any questions, comments, concerns that you may have. We'll keep it going from there. Same podcast time, same podcast channel tomorrow afternoon. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you then.